This is Newsday on the BBC. I'm Rico Hizon in Singapore. The headlines. China joins G7 countries in warning President Trump against import tariffs. On allegations of collusion with Russia, Mr. Trump's lawyer says the president probably has the power to pardon himself, but won't.
Pardoning himself would just be unthinkable, and it would lead to probably an immediate impeachment.
I'm Kasia Madeira in London. Also in this programme, love is stronger than hate. The message from London as it marks 1 year since the London Bridge terror attacks in which 8 people died. And the nesting birds at risk from rats on a group of Australian islands. We'll talk to a Queensland ranger overseeing a 3-week baiting programme.
Live from our studios in Singapore and London. This is BBC World News. It's Newsday.
Hello everyone, glad you could join us. It's 8 in the morning here in Singapore and 1 in the morning in London, from China to the European Union to Canada. Warnings that the world is on the brink of a trade war with the United States after a meeting in Beijing between Vice President Liu He and U.S. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross. The Chinese state news agency carried a statement making clear China's position, saying, quote, if the United States introduces trade sanctions, including tariffs, all the economic and trade achievements negotiated by the two parties will be void. In Canada, where a G7 meeting will be taking place this weekend, the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made clear his anger at President Trump's tariff proposals.
He's talked about the fact of this, he's worried about trade surpluses, trade deficits around the world. Well, they have a $2 billion surplus on steel with us. So it's not like the trade is imbalanced against the U.S.
And the proposals have faced criticism even from within the president's own party, with the Republican governor of Ohio, John Kasich, calling them dangerous.
We're punishing our friends. If they were cheating, that's one thing. But they slapped us on under a phony excuse. We're going alone on that. We withdrew from the Paris Accords. We withdrew from the Iranian deal, which they're furious about. We didn't get in the Pacific Trade Agreement. We're going it alone. It's not America first, it's America alone. And I think it's just not good policy. In fact, it borders on dangerous, in my opinion.
The BBC's Chris Buckler has more now from Washington.
I think what's really interesting is at the moment, Rico, we're seeing a trade war emerge on several different fronts. And okay, there are some in Washington that want to play down this phrase trade war, but it's the exact phrase that Donald Trump keeps on saying and indeed tweeting about. This idea that trade wars are, in his words, easy to win. Well, that might not be the case, and there are difficulties with all of this, and some in the Republican Party are getting very concerned with the way this is progressing, particularly when it comes to America's allies, because they feel that potentially this is creating disagreements, it's creating bad relationships, but beyond that, there is now the worry of what retaliatory tariffs mean. I was out speaking to people today, just getting a sense of what they feel about all this, and there is a worry that this could start to hit them in the pocket. The reality is the public are worried that if there starts to be a situation where products from America are being taxed, and we all of a sudden have taxes coming on products coming into America, that when they go to the shops, they will start to pay the price of it. And of course, what Republicans are concerned about is that if that does prove to be the case, then in elections that are coming up in November, they could ultimately have to pay the price themselves by having a difficult election.
A difficult election indeed, and President Trump will be facing the wrath of global leaders, Chris, when he attends the G7 summit in Canada.
Yeah, and President Trump, of course, loves talking about how tough he is on trade. At those rallies, he talks about America first, and he really makes a point of that. But actually, sometimes he doesn't particularly like face-to-face confrontation. And if you were listening to the conversations that were had by the G7 finance ministers over the weekend, there was no doubt that the other countries were saying that they're extremely angry. There was no end statement from that G7. They did have a G7 finance minister's family photograph, but it was an unhappy family. They were talking about just how damaging and how difficult these tariffs could be to international trade. And frankly, therefore, a confrontation is coming. And Donald Trump is going to have to face up to those leaders whenever he meets them in Quebec this coming weekend. It is going to be a difficult one for him because ultimately he has said a lot of things that have really raised the stakes on this whole issue of trade. Is he prepared to compromise? At the moment, he's showing no signs of it, but of course there is always the potential to try to smooth things whenever Donald Trump is in a room with somebody else, as opposed to the other side of a keyboard.
Chris Buckler there speaking to Rico earlier. We will have more analysis on those trade tariffs later, right on Newsday. But now we're going to keep the focus on President Trump because his personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, well, he has been doing the rounds again on US Sunday morning talk shows. The former New York mayor said that Mr. Trump probably has the power to pardon himself over alleged collusion with Russia, but doesn't intend to do so because it could lead to impeachment. Mr. Giuliani was answering questions about the investigation into Russia's role in the 2016 election.
There's nothing that limits the presidential power of pardon from a federal crime, not a state crime. President Trump is not going to do that. He's obviously not going to give up any of his pardon powers or any other future president's pardon powers. But under these circumstances, he's not going to do that. Pardoning himself would just be unthinkable, and it would lead to probably an immediate impeachment. You know, you get the House, Senate be under tremendous pressure. President Trump has no need to do that. He didn't do anything wrong.
Rudy Giuliani there speaking to the US networks. Well, also making news today, Italy's new Matteo Salvini has said on a visit to Sicily that the island and also the rest of the country must cease to be what he called the refugee camp of Europe. The leader of the far-right League Party has promised tough measures to combat illegal immigration. He said that his government's plans represented common sense.
It's not enough to reduce landings, we need to increase expulsions. Last year we deported just 7,000 immigrants. At this rate, it'll take a century. We must open deportation centres in each region, making agreements with countries of origin and renegotiate Italy's role in Europe.
At least 48 migrants have died after their boat capsized off the Tunisian coast. 67 others were rescued by the Coast Guard off Sfax province. Tunisia's defense ministry says that the victims were Tunisians and also other nationalities. The rescue operation was suspended late on Sunday, but it will resume on Monday morning. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad plans to make a state visit to North Korea. That's according to the North's state news agency. If it does go ahead, it will mark the first time that the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has hosted a head of state since assuming power in 2011. Hundreds of passengers have been left stranded at Hamburg airport after air traffic ground to a halt due to a power outage. The person for the airport, which is Germany's fifth busiest, are working to fix the problem, which was caused by a short circuit. Cricket news, and England surged to victory over Pakistan by an innings and 55 runs to win the second test and draw the series. Jos Buttler's 80 not out helped England to a total of 363 in their first innings. English bowlers kept up the pressure and bowled out the visitors for 184 runs. It's June, which means it should be the beginning of summer here in Europe, but, well, you wouldn't have thought so, judging by these pictures. This is Brasov in central Romania, and yes, what you're seeing are large hailstones and also ice hitting much of the central and western region of this country. The bad news is that this bad weather is expected to continue for the next few days.
Britain's Prime Minister Theresa May has laid a wreath at the scene of the London Bridge terror attack to mark 1 year since 8 people were killed by 3 men armed with knives. 48 others were injured when the attackers first drove a van into pedestrians and then stabbed people who were enjoying a night out. June Kelly has the details.
On this first Sunday of summer, hundreds gathered at Southwark Cathedral to reflect on a long night full of fear in London 12 months ago. Leading the public figures was the Prime Minister. It's less than a fortnight since she and the Labour leader were at a memorial service for the victims of the Manchester bombing. Last year, 36 people in the UK were murdered in terror attacks. 8 lives were taken in the London Bridge atrocity. One victim, James McMullen, was British. Chrissy Archibald was from Canada. Ignacio Echeverria from Spain. There were 2 Australians, Kirsty Bowden and Sarah Zelenak, and 3 French victims, Sébastien Bélanger, Alexandre Pijard and Xavier Thomas. Some were visiting London, others had made it their home. And at this interfaith service from the Bishop of Southwark, a simple, strong message.
For those of us who profess faith, the invocation of holy names by those perpetrating these acts was not only profoundly distressing, but needs to be rejected.
And there were the memories of local people.
The attack happens in the place where we live, work and socialise. In a few minutes, everything changes, though it will be hours before we'll know the true cost. Shocked to the core of their own humanity, police and paramedics still did everything they needed to do. They made sure that everyone still living stayed safe.
The congregation then moved into the cathedral grounds, and here the cameras were allowed to film the bereaved families for the first time. They completed the planting of an olive tree, known as the Tree of Healing. Later, the families moved to the corner of London Bridge, where there was a minute's silence. There were floral tributes from some of those injured, including PC Wayne Marks, who was stabbed in the head and body as he took on the 3 attackers. Among those laying flowers, Jermaine Bernard, who was on the bridge that night and in the midst of the attack, tended to one of the injured.
Her name is Regina. She was from Germany and she came here on holiday, and she was the first person I saw who got run over there at the time. And yes, she will forever be in my heart, and so, you know, I just hope that she's okay.
This is one of the most vibrant quarters of London, but today the pace slowed as people stopped and thought about what happened here a year ago and all that was lost. June Kelly, BBC News.
You're watching Newsday on the BBC, live from Singapore and London. Still to come on the program. A group of Australian islands closest to the public for a 3-week baiting program targeting black rats.
Also coming up on the program, from rats to polar bears. We'll have the story of how this big bear left a hotel via a small window.
Glad you're staying with us. You're watching Newsday on the BBC. I'm Rico Hizon in Singapore.
And I'm Kasia Madeira in London. Our top stories: China is joining G7 countries in warning President Trump against import tariffs.
Donald Trump's lawyer has argued that the president probably has the power to pardon himself over allegations of collusion with Russia, but he does not intend to do so. And a genetic test could spare thousands of early-stage breast cancer patients the agony of chemotherapy. The test determines the probability of the tumor spreading again after surgery. Almost 70% of patients could have their cancer treated with surgery and hormone therapy alone. This story is popular on BBC.com. Let's now take a look at some of the front pages from around the world, and the Straits Times newspaper of Singapore is one of several publications leading on China's warning to the U.S. over trade. Well, the paper is reporting an agreement for China to buy more American goods will be void if the United States implements sanctions. Let's now turn the page to the South China Morning Post, and it is running a story on people in Hong Kong defying Beijing authorities. It says organizers of a vigil to mark the 29th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square crackdown are pressing ahead despite warnings that they are crossing a new red line. And finally, the front page of the international edition of the New York Times reports more people are coming out to play in Iran. The paper says weddings and events are growing in popularity as old society taboos fade away and social events become more relaxed, especially in the capital of Tehran. And those are the papers. And now, Kasia, a polar bear is trending online.
Not just any polar bear, Rico. This is an escaping polar bear. This is a video of this trapped bear, and it's proving to be incredibly popular on social media. The bear paid an unexpected visit to a hotel in Norway, breaking into a storage room, no doubt looking for something to eat. But as soon as this polar bear heard a helicopter arriving, he rushed to escape from a rather small window. It took him a little bit of effort, but don't you worry, he did make the great escape. Now let's return to our top story. The warnings that the world is on the brink of a trade war with the United States after it decided to impose new tariffs. A little earlier, I spoke to Isaac Stone Fish. He's a senior fellow at the Asia Society Center on US-China Relations. And I began by asking him what he makes of this standoff.
It's fair to say that we are on the brink of a trade war. Now, both the American side and, to be fair, the Chinese side have not been predictable in what they've been saying and what they've been doing, and it's certainly possible that in a few days the two sides will reach some sort of agreement that lowers tensions. But right now, I think a lot of people are not optimistic about how the trade relationship is evolving with the US and China, and with the United States and Canada and EU, and frankly a lot of parts of the world.
Does the US have an option, a different option, say, with China? Because, of course, its trade deficit is so huge. The US buys nearly 4 times as much from China as it sells. Does Donald Trump, does he have any other options?
Donald Trump has a lot of other options if he so chooses to use them. So Trump is really obsessed with this idea that a trade deficit is bad for American trade, and a lot of economists disagree with him. I think the difference between the United States' relationship with China and its trade relationship with Canada and the EU, for example, is that China is not a US ally, and China has a lot of unfair trade practices, whereas Canada and the EU are much more surprising targets for US trade ire.
There was a lot of surprise, wasn't there? You could just see it was palpable with Justin Trudeau, the way he reacted. What do you make of the fact that the EU and Canada have been targeted like this?
It's very surprising. I think, on the one hand, I guess you have to give Trump some credit for following through on a promise to be tougher on global trade. On the other hand, it just seems like something that doesn't benefit American workers, American people, citizens of those countries, and the relationship in general. So it's a bit of a head-scratcher.
Isaac Stone Fish, he's a senior fellow at the Asia Society Center on US-China Relations, just giving us a little bit more analysis, and we've got lots more on our website. Now, an Indian man who was raped by a preacher at the age of 14 has revealed horrific details of the crime. In India, a culture of silence surrounds cases of sexual assault on boys. He has found support among family and friends, and he is now helping other victims to break their silence.
All those 14 years, I was going through a lot of trauma. I was feeling a lot of guilt and shame, despite it not being my mistake. It was so painful that I remember so vividly. For almost 2 weeks, I was not able to walk properly. It's so unfortunate that none of my family members, relatives, friends, or my school teachers were able to guess that there is something wrong with this kid. I ended up going there for almost a year. I was raped 3 times. When I think about it now, it always gives me goosebumps. It makes me angry. Sometimes I wake up at night and I hit the wall as hard as I can. I'm sorry. Unfortunately, in a society like ours, it's the victim who has to bear the shame rather than the perpetrator.
A story of a sexual abuse victim in India. We've heard a lot in the news lately of idyllic tourism spots being closed because of too many visitors and the damage they are causing. Well, a group of islands off the far north Queensland coast in Australia are also more or less off limits, not though because of humans, but because of rats. A 3-week baiting program starts today on the Franklin Islands and northern Barnard Islands off the coast from the city of Cairns. Well, the rats are having a devastating impact on nesting birds and the biodiversity of the area. Warwick Armstrong from the Queensland Parks and Wildlife Service explained to me earlier how he is planning to tackle this problem.
These rats have established themselves on a number of small continental islands close to the main coastline in the Franklin and Barnard Islands, and possibly they were introduced here in the early 1900s by ships that visited the area. Or another explanation could be that they, in fact, were washed out of our major river systems during flood events and what we term rafted over. They're having obviously a large impact on our nesting seabirds, as you'd said.
And today you officially start, Ranger Warwick, a 3-week baiting program. How are you planning to undertake this whole initiative and eliminate these black rats?
So, Rico, it's because these are continental islands, they are extremely steep and inaccessible. And so the idea with our program is that we need to deliver baits to the entire island for it to be successful. And as I said, we'll kick off today with that program, and it'll run over the next 3 weeks.
And what do you hope to achieve after the 3-week baiting program, Ranger Warwick?
So black rats on these islands is obviously a high priority conservation management program. We know these islands are really important seabird nesting areas, and they also play an important role as areas for migratory birds to the Great Barrier Reef and to the southern hemisphere to rest, recuperate, and obviously feed and forage on.
So while you're undertaking this 3-week baiting program, Ranger Warwick, will these islands be totally closed off to tourists?
So, Rico, they will be closed, not because the infestations are so high that would be a problem for visitors to them. It's highly unlikely our visitors to these islands would even see a rat during their visit. Most people would come over for a day and spend a day enjoying the island and the fringing reefs, doing some snorkeling. But this is purely for a management purpose to allow us access and not hinder any visitor experience.
Warwick Armstrong there speaking to Rico earlier. Now, rats certainly not in Singapore. They want everything to be perfect, no pests whatsoever, because Singapore is, as we all know, getting ready to host that on-off summit on at the moment between President Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. And yeah, like I say, Rico, it's on at the moment. We're hoping that everything will go smoothly, but there's a bit of wrangling going on.
We'll keep our fingers crossed, Kasia. Because according to some reports, the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un wants to stay in the presidential suite of an exclusive hotel here at the cost, listen to this, Kasia, $6,000 a night. And his country says it cannot pay this bill. But it is currently unclear who will pay, but it could be embarrassing when it comes to the checkout. All right, before we go, let's take a look at what's coming up on Asia Business Report. How Japan's biggest producer of high-tech toilets is getting flush from expanding into foreign markets.
And before we go, we showed you some images of rain earlier on in Romania. Now let's have a little bit more sun, because this is Place de la République in Paris, which has gone green this weekend, and it's all in order to celebrate biodiversity in this famous Parisian square.